All right, welcome to my week. This is the wrong one. I am sorry. There we go. All right, welcome to my week 4 presentation. My name is Patricia Stovall, and we are going to be talking about the integumentary system today. So the integumentary system is comprised of the skin and the underlying tissue. Its main functions are protection, temperature maintenance, synthesis and storage of nutrients, sensory reception, and excretion and secretion. And if we dive into those a little bit more, we see that for protection, it's because it covers the body and it's going to protect the underlying tissue, organs, and it's going to keep all of our bodily fluids inside. It also protects the outside from things like impacts, chemicals, and infections. When we talk about temperature maintenance, we say the skin helps maintain the body temperature by regulating heat exchange with the environment. And if you've ever been outside and you start sweating, it's because everything in your skin. That is sensory reception. Never mind. Temperature maintenance, it's going to regulate and exchange heat with the environment. All right, so for synthesis and storage of nutrients, the epidermis synthesizes vitamin D, and the dermis stores large amounts of lipids in adipose tissue. All right, as I was saying earlier, sensory reception, the receptors detect stimuli like pressure, pain, touch, temperature, and it's going to relay that to the nervous system, so that way the nervous system can do something about it. And for excretion and secretion, we're going to excrete salts, water, waste, while it's going to secrete things like breast milk because the breasts have specialized integumentary glands for that. All right. So for the skin, there's going to be two main layers, the epidermis and the dermis. And the epidermis is going to be the surface, and the dermis is going to be the more underlying layers, while the hypodermis is going to be this subcutaneous layer. I'm so sorry. I can't pronounce the word right now. I only ever read. I don't listen to the videos. So for some reason, not for some reason, we know, but my pronunciation is always a little bit off. The subcutaneous layer, it's going to be loose connective tissue. It's interwoven with the dermis, and this is going to separate the integumentary system from the deeper tissue and organs. Now, in our textbook, it does mention that they include the hypodermis whenever they talk about the integumentary system, but some do not think that the hypodermis is a part of the integumentary system. So that's just something to remember. All right, so the epidermis, and if we look at our diagram right here, the epidermis has many, many layers. We're going to talk about how there's different numbers of layers when it comes to thick skin and thin skin. So thin skin is very thin. It's only going to be about 0.08 millimeters, while thicker skin is about 0.5 millimeters. And thick skin is going to have 5 layers, while thin skin is going to have 4. And if we start down here with the deepest layer, the stratum basal, it's the deepest basal layer, and it's attached to the basement membrane. This contains basal cells, which are stem cells, melanocytes, and tactile cells, which are Merkel cells. And what the interesting thing about the stratum basal is that this is where the mitotic cells that contribute to the replacement and regeneration of the cells on the surface of the skin reside. So the second deepest layer is the stratum spinosum, and these are going to contain keratinocytes, which are bound together by desmosomes, and keratinocytes produce keratin. The third deepest layer is the stratum granulosome, and this also has keratinocytes, but keratin fibers develop as cells and become thinner and flatter in this layer. And gradually the plasma membranes thicken and the organelles disintegrate and the cells die. The second most surface layer is the stratum lucidum, and this appears as a glassy layer in thick skin only, so this is the layer that is only in thick skin. And the most surface layer is going to be the stratum corneum, and this is multiple layers of flattened, dead, interlocking keratinocytes. And it's water resistant, but not waterproof. All right. So now we're also going to keep talking about the epidermis. And the epidermis is avascular, which means that there are no blood cells. So it relies on diffusion for nutrients. And As I said, it relies on the diffusion of nutrients and oxygens from capillaries and of the connected dermis. So the epidermis does rely on the dermis. The epidermal cells with the highest metabolic demand will lie closest to the basement membrane, which is the shortest diffusion distance in the dermis, for the dermis. All right, just some words we're going to talk about, refresh on. Melanin is a pigment. It colors the epidermis, and it's one of the two pigments for that. And melanin itself has two types. It's red, yellow, or black, or brown, black. Melanocytes are the pigment-producing cells that make melanin. Keratin is a protein that coats the surface of the skin, but it also forms the basic structure of hair, calluses, and nails. And the keratinocytes are what make the keratin. It's the body's most abundant epithelial cells, and of course they contain keratin. The dendritic cells are involved in the immune response, while Merkel cells are specialized epithelial cells, and they are sensitive to touch. All right, so now we're going to go on to talk about the dermis. And the dermis has a lot of not a lot of layers, it's 2 layers. But the papillary layer and the reticular layer. So the papillary layer, if we go to the diagram right here, we see that it is a very thin layer compared to the reticular layer. But the papillary layer consists of aerial tissue that supports and nourishes the epidermis, and it also contains the capillaries, lymphatic vessels, and the sensory neurons of the dermis. The reticular layer consists of interwoven, dense, irregular connective tissue that contains both elastic fibers and collagen fibers. And these elastic fibers do provide flexibility, while the collagen fibers limit that flexibility, so that way our tissue doesn't get damaged. These bundles of collagen fibers do blend into the papillary layer above, and that does blur the boundary between the layers a little bit. But the collagen fibers of the reticular layer also extend to the underlying subcutaneous layer, as we were talking about, the hypodermis. All right, so now we're going to talk about hair. And hair is really interesting because it's technically just like an accessory to the integumentary system. We see that the diagram, it contains the kind of, how do you say? Oh, I can't draw. I thought I could draw to, okay. It's all right. So if we look right here at the diagram, it kind of shows how, where the, things that make up the hair follicle is. So the hair follicle is going to be, this entire thing. If we look at the third picture, it shows more of a close-up to it. But a part of the hair follicle is the very bottom, which is called the hair papilla, and the hair matrix, which surrounds it. The hair root is above it. We see it right here. And it's this part that goes all the way, not all the way up, but it's this little part right here at the bottom. And it's the portion that anchors the hair into the skin. So this is what's keeping our hair in our skin. And hair is very, not useless, but it is an accessory. It's non-living, and it's keratinized structures. It's produced by hair follicles, and it's on the surface of the skin everywhere except for the sides and soles of the feet, the palms of the hands, the sides of the fingers and toes, the lips, and portions of the genital organs. And part of it right here, if we look, we see kind of a little red piece that's connecting to the hair follicle. That's called an erector pili muscle, and these are just bundles of smooth muscle cells that and they extend from the papillary dermis to the connective tissue sheath around the hair follicle. So yes, right here, as we see, it's from the blue part, it's going up into the red. And when stimulated, these like to pull on the hair follicles, and it forces the hair to stand up. So contractions may be caused by emotional states, if you're super scared or super angry, or even in the cold, if you've ever felt goosebumps on your arms, where your hair is, it's those little places right there. It's very cool. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the sebaceous glands, which these are also called oil glands. They discharge an oily lipid secretion into the hair follicles and sometimes onto the skin. And this secretion inhibits the growth of bacteria, it lubricates the hair, and it conditions the surrounding skin. And if we look right here, we can see that the sebaceous glands right here are like almost like right next to the hair follicle. And then some are not next to the hair follicle. But it is in the dermis. We see a lot of it in the dermis. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the pseudoferous glands, which are sweat glands. And there's two types. There's apocrine sweat glands, which is really ironic that they're called that because they do not use an apocrine method of secretion. They use a merocrine method of secretion. They're active at puberty, and they discharge a sticky, cloudy, and potentially odorous secretion. It secretes into the hair follicles, the armpits, around the nipples, and in the pubic region, while the eccrine sweat glands function to cool the surface of the skin and lower body temperature. So if you've ever gotten like really hot and you start sweating, that sweat is from these eccrine sweat glands. It's to try and cool your body down. That way it doesn't get too warm. They discharge secretions directly onto the surface of the skin, and they're far more numerous and widely distributed than apocrine glands. Perspiration or sweat, that's produced by these eccrine glands is 99% water. And if we look over here, we can see a lot of what we talked about. We can see the hair shaft, we can see the pili muscle, we can see the apocrine ones, the eccrine ones, and you see how they're connected differently. How the apocrine is connected onto the hair follicle, and the eccrine is like connected right into the surface of the skin. Just a cool little tidbit of information. All right. So now we are going to talk about nails, and nails are used to protect the dorsal surfaces of the skin when it comes to the tips of the fingers and toes. The structure is, if we look over here, we can see kind of like where everything is. I'm going to zoom out a little so we can see everything all at once. So the nail body is going to be the visible portion of the nail, while the nail bed are going to be the areas of the epidermis covered by the nail body, so that under part. The nail root is going to be the very place where the nail is produced. So if we look right here, the nail root is going to be like right there. And the free edge is going to be the tip of the nail that extends past the finger. So this part right here. And the cuticle is the portion of the stratum corneum that extends over the exposed nail nearest to the root. So this part right here. This part right here. If you see that little part. All right. And the lunula, is the obscure pale crescent near the root of the blood vessel. So if you look on your hand, you have that kind of like little crescent whitish part to your nail. It's that part. The lunula. All right, and so lastly, we're going to talk about pigments. And in the body, we have pigments for two types of things. We have pigments for the skin and pigments for the blood. And when it comes to the blood, we have hemoglobin, heme, which contains iron. This gives our red blood cells the red color. And when we talk about skin, we talk about two different types of pigmentations, melanin and keratin. And melanin has two types. We talked about this earlier, the red yellow and the brown black. Melanin is stored with intercellular vesicles called melasomas, and it increases in response to sunlight exposure. So if you've ever gotten like a little darker than what you usually are when you spend a lot of time outside during like the summer or something. I know we're in Texas, so I'm pretty sure everybody gets darker in the summer because it's just hot. It's just the sun is always out. But freckles represent but yes, the melanin increases in sunlight exposure. And what's really cool is that freckles represent areas of like greater than average melanin production. And so that's why if you've ever like looked at somebody in the winter and they don't have freckles, but if you go back and look at them in the summer, they have a lot of freckles. Obviously it's because there's more sunlight, so we're getting more freckle production. But those specific areas are going to be where melatonin is going like off the charts. All right. And last but not last but not least is carotene, and it's this orange-yellow pigment. It accumulates in the epidermal cells, and it can be converted into vitamin C. However, too much of this can convert your epidermis pigmentation, like your skin pigmentation. I don't know if you've ever seen, like, the meme video where it's the person comes into the office and they look all orange because they eat too many carrots. Carrots have carotene in them, and if we consume too much foods who have it, we will start turning the pigmentation of carotene, which is an orange yellowy pigmentation. All right, and that is all I have for you guys today. This was a joy. This was actually really interesting to learn about. Pigmentation is so fun. I can't stop thinking about the video with the guy with the orange pigmentation because of the carrots. But this was really fun, and I'll see you guys next week.